such a fair shake. I can promise you that none of them are falling. I can promise you that none of them are falling. Since we know that this is all a dream, nothing we do here matters anyway. We can go flying off of a cliff. We'll just wake up here again anyway. And what I did didn't happen anyway. And all that's left of it is the dream that I made. The dream I can't believe, that will haunt me every day. Barely any blood was shed at all, and it was never real anyway. I can give you this kiss on the cheek, since you gave my name such a fair shake. I can promise you that none of this will happen. I can promise you that none of this will happen. Since we know that this is all a dream, nothing we do here matters anyway. We can go flying off a cliff. We'll just wake up here again anyway. And what I did didn't happen anyway. And all that's left of it is the dream that I made. The dream I can't leave, that will haunt me every day. Barely any blood was shed at all, and it was never real anyway. Get back in my dream now. 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 Get back in my dream. Get back in my dream. Get back in my dream. Do you remember that night? When I told you in my thoughts what I thought would happen? And you sent me exactly that, as if to dare me. Okay, so try it.
Alright, today we're going to dive into something really fascinating and pretty haunting. It's a monologue called The Fiddler's Fallen, and it's just this incredible journey into denial, guilt, and the prisons we can build for ourselves inside our own minds. Okay, so let's jump right in with the line that kicks this whole thing off. This single sentence is the bedrock for the entire monologue. It's this attempt to state something as a fact, right? A fact that, if you accept it, just erases every consequence and justifies everything that follows. Now, what's so interesting is how this whole thing starts. It's not with an argument, it's a promise. a gentle reassurance that in this world he's creating, everything is okay. It's meant to create this immediate feeling of safety and calm. And you can see exactly how he's building this defense, step by step. He starts with a very specific comfort. None of them are fallen. And then he zooms out to this huge, universal law, nothing we do here matters. It's a very deliberate move to create a totally safe reality, one where your actions literally have no weight. So you might be asking, how do you even get someone to buy into an idea this extreme? Well, you do it by creating what looks like a simple, easy-to-follow logic, even if that logic is built on a really, really shaky foundation. And here's that logic, laid out for us. It's this clean, almost too perfect three-step argument. See, if you just accept step one, the other two feel like they have to be true. And if you're wrestling with some kind of massive guilt or trauma, an argument like this is, well, it's incredibly seductive. It's a total escape from responsibility, like an intellectual loophole to get out of an emotional prison. And to really sell it, to make you believe it, the speaker throws out this wild, really extreme example. We're not just talking about little mistakes here. He's saying that even life and death actions have become completely meaningless. It's the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card for this world he's created. But here's where you start to see the cracks. I mean, think about it. If nothing really matters, why are you working so hard to justify everything? The very fact that he's trying to convince us, and probably himself, tells you that on some level he knows something does matter. He's trying just a little too hard. Okay, so let's dig into that, because this is where the speaker's own words start to completely unravel their argument, revealing this deep conflict that's hiding right under the surface of this supposedly calm, logical dream. And boom, here it is, the central contradiction laid bare. How can a dream be not real, but also be an inescapable prison that haunts you every single day? A dream is supposed to end, right? But this one doesn't, and that's the core conflict he just can't resolve. And you have to listen really carefully to the words here. Barely any. He doesn't say no blood. He says barely any. That one little word is basically a confession hiding in plain sight. It's a crack in the story that admits that something real, something violent actually happened. It totally undermines the whole "it was never real" claim. So, what happens when your perfect logic just falls apart? Well, a whole new emotion bursts onto the scene. That calm, reassuring tone, it can't hold up anymore. And that emotion is anger. Yeah, this is the moment where the whole act just shatters. The gentle promise completely transforms into this harsh, aggressive demand. He's trying to use force now because his logic has completely failed him. And this is such a key psychological tell. You know, when that fortress of logic you've built just crumbles, what's left? Aggression. He's not trying to explain anything anymore. He's trying to force his reality to be true, just by shouting the same lines, as if saying them louder will somehow work. And get this, these are the exact same words he used at the very beginning. But listen to them now. It's not a comfort anymore, is it? It feels like an accusation, a threat. The subtext is no longer, hey, don't worry, it's, you better believe me. So after the anger burns out, what's left? Just pure, raw panic. He's not talking to us anymore. He's not trying to convince anybody. He's just trying to shout down reality itself. And this is where the loop starts. It's this frantic, desperate command. And did you catch that? It's no longer, this is a dream or our dream. It's my dream. This is a prison for one, and the walls are closing in fast. You can feel the panic just building with each repetition, right? The dream that was supposed to be this safe space, this escape route, it's become the cage. And reality is pounding on the door, trying to get in, and he's desperately trying to barricade it shut. And by now, yeah, it's just a scream into the void. All that composure, all that logic, it's completely gone. This isn't some calm philosopher explaining his worldview. This is a prisoner, shaking the bars of a cage that he built for himself. And then, just when you think it's all chaos, this one crystal clear memory cuts through all the noise. And it hints at, well, everything. A shared moment, a choice, maybe even a dare. It suggests this whole nightmare started with a very real event, a moment where two people knew it was coming, and they just let it happen. So in the end, the very thing he does to deny reality, it becomes the loudest confession of his guilt. The dream he built to escape the truth just ends up replaying it over and over, forever. And that leaves us with this one final haunting question.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are tackling something truly unusual.
I think that's putting it lightly.
We're stepping completely away from objective facts, from reports or data. Instead, we are diving headfirst into, fragments of human thought.
That's a good way to put it.
We have a mix of transcribed texts and this very cryptic audio excerpt. Both of them are titled The Fiddler's Fallen.
And these sources, they don't give us facts. Not in the way we usually think of them. What they give us is more like an internal manifesto.
Yes.
A really subjective and profoundly contradictory worldview from one single speaker who is, clearly very distressed.
It's less of a report and more of a justification.
Right.
A really layered and, I think we'll find, often delusional one.
Absolutely.
So what we have here is this fractured glimpse into a person trying to rationalize, to deny a deeply troubling event, an event they only ever call what I did.
Right.
So our mission for this deep dive is, it's complex. We have to be like forensic psychologists, almost.
I think that's exactly right. We have to extract the core arguments from the speaker, try to understand the just immense emotional weight they're trying to suppress.
And then pinpoint the moments where it all starts to crack. The emotional shifts, the structural failures in their logic.
And the challenge, the real challenge is that the speaker has built an entire system of reality, a whole dream state.
And it's built for one reason.
To eliminate consequence.
Yeah.
We're basically analyzing the logic of denial, but on a metaphysical level.
At the very heart of this entire monologue is this one stark, repeated assertion. It's the engine for everything else.
It is. It's the foundation.
And that engine is just the ultimate statement of, of philosophical apathy.
Yeah.
The lines that define this whole system are, since we know that this is all a dream, nothing we do here matters anyway.
And that premise, it's not just a casual thought. It's the absolute justification for everything he says after.
Everything. So that's where we have to begin right there.
Right.
Okay, so let's really unpack this core assertion. Since we know that this is all a dream, this isn't just, a poetic musing like life is but a walking shadow or something. This speaker seems to genuinely believe this.
Or desperately needs to believe it. That reality, our physical reality, can just be reduced to a subjective dream that you can escape from.
Right.
He's adopting what, a philosopher might call radical personal idealism, but he's not doing it for intellectual curiosity. He's applying it as a psychological defense mechanism.
So it is a tool.
It's a tool. He's not just saying reality might be a dream, he's stating it as a fact, since we know. And by establishing that, by making it a known fact, while he grants himself the ultimate philosophical carte blanche.
But, okay, if he's so confident, if he knows this, why does he have to keep saying it? Why assert it so forcefully?
That's the question, isn't it?
I mean, the very need to say it out loud to someone else seems to undermine how certain he is. If I truly know the sky is blue, I don't need to make it my mantra.
And that's exactly where the analysis stops being purely philosophical and becomes psychological. The repetition, this insistence that we know this, it suggests he's fighting something, a profound internal doubt. He's using the statement as a rhetorical tool to convince the listener, sure, but I think he's mostly trying to convince himself.
So he's shoring up the walls of his own denial.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He's asserting his mind as the one true source of reality, which means physical consequence becomes just a construct, something he can throw away just by saying it's not real.
And this idea, this philosophical assertion, it immediately leads to this massive, chilling implication for how you can act. If the world is just a dream, then all the rules, moral laws, physical laws, they're just suggestions. They're part of the dream's code, and you can break them.
And that's the transition. He goes from philosophy to a very practical justification.
And that's implication one.
Implication one, the complete embrace of nihilism when it comes to action. The text is so explicit. Nothing we do here matters anyway.
It's the logical conclusion of the dream premise.
It is. If the physical world is temporary, if it's unreal, just a projection, then everything that happens in it, good, bad, destructive, kind, it's all, by definition, irrelevant.
But I think we need to be careful with the word nihilism here. It's not just apathy. It's not just a lack of caring.
No, it's much more active than that.
Yeah, this premise doesn't just let him not care. It gives him absolute freedom to act in extreme ways without any moral burden. It's a mechanism for getting rid of accountability before you even do the thing.
That's the key distinction. It's not passive resignation. It's an active, dangerous license to act. And he doesn't leave it in the abstract, does he? He gives us this chilling, practical example.
He paints a very stark picture.
We can go flying off of a cliff.
That specific example, flying off a cliff, it's such a profound statement. It's a total dismissal of physical reality. He's setting the stakes as high as possible.
Life and death.
But what's so fascinating is what comes right after. The immediate, almost casual reassurance that follows this. This hypothetical act of self-destruction.
It's the safety clause. It's the fine print of the delusion.
Exactly.
That's the key piece of his personal dream logic. It's vital we understand this part. He adds, we'll just wake up here again anyway.
The ultimate reset button.
It is. It's a reset button reality. Actions, even the most lethal ones, are fundamentally without consequence because the slate just gets wiped clean. It's almost like respawning in a video game.
A modern digital kind of denial.
Physical death, irreversible action, just means you go back to the start. No lasting physical impact.
So the dream isn't just an escape from responsibility. He's using it to build a personal safety net.
Yes.
It guarantees he can do these high-stakes things without paying the ultimate price. It's a mechanism for infinite chances.
It creates a reality where the risk is always capped. The dream is a shield against any true finality, but, that shield itself kind of exposes a weakness, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, if he truly, genuinely believed nothing mattered, why even bother with the reassurance? Why build in the waking up part?
Because the idea of death, of finality, it does still matter to him.
On some subconscious level, absolutely. The reassurance is a tell.
And this brings us to the second implication, which is even more specific.
Yeah.
And I think it reveals the real motivation for this whole philosophical construction project.
The denial of a specific past event.
Yes, he asserts, and what I did didn't happen anyway.
And this is such a critical, deeply personal pivot. He's not just talking about potential future actions anymore.
No.
He is retroactively trying to erase a specific past did. The entire scaffolding of this dream reality. It seems like it was built for this one purpose.
To nullify guilt.
Guilt, trauma, consequence, whatever is stemming from this single act that he did.
It's not enough for him to say, I regret what I did, or that was a mistake. He has to claim that reality itself was so fluid that the event never had a true historical existence.
It's a psychological attempt to edit his own timeline, his own consciousness. I mean, think about it. Guilt needs a real action to stick to your conscience. So if you declare the action unreal, you're trying to create a moral vacuum. He's saying the past is malleable.
Which is a much deeper denial than just denying future consequences. You're denying your own history.
Exactly.
You can feel the psychological weight of this, what I did. It becomes so clear in his urgent need to provide assurance. That's the next key element we see repeated.
Oh, absolutely. The repeated emphatic promises, we see them in both the text and the audio.
I can promise you that none of them are fallen. And then the variation, none of them are fallen.
It's repetition there. It elevates it, doesn't it? It's not a casual observation. It's a desperate, almost pleading mantra.
He's implying that because reality is just a dream, the victims, or whoever was involved in what I did, they couldn't have suffered any real lasting harm.
Therefore, none of them are fallen.
Which strongly suggests that the past action involved direct harm, or at least a perceived catastrophe involving other people.
He is desperate to assure the recipient, and let's be honest, probably himself, that there were no real casualties.
And the dream logic is his proof, his irrefutable legal defense.
It's a self-issued certificate of innocence. If you, the listener, accept my dream premise, then you have to accept the conclusion that the collateral damage was zero.
It's a package deal. Accept my philosophy and I guarantee everyone's okay.
Exactly. The promise of safety is entirely dependent on you buying into the dream framework.
But structurally, doesn't the simple fact that he needs to give this assurance already contradict the whole nothing matters idea?
Yes, 1,000% yes.
If nothing matters, why are you spending so much energy promising safety to people who don't exist in a world that isn't real?
It's the first major structural crack in the argument. He's prioritizing his own emotional need for reassurance over the cold logic of nihilism.
The logic falls apart.
If the dream logic were truly sound, he'd be indifferent. He wouldn't care about the state of those who were fallen. The entire first section is this rhetorical effort to build an airtight case for denial. But his own psychological needs start compromising it immediately.
And that need for validation, it leads us right to his direct acknowledgement of the person he's talking to. It involves a small, intimate gesture and a reward. I can give you this kiss on the cheek, since you gave my name such a fair shake.
And that phrase, fair shake, is incredibly loaded.
It is, isn't it?
It implies that his identity, his rationale, his reputation has been put on trial somehow, presumably in relation to this controversial what I did.
So to get a fair shake means the recipient has treated his story, this whole dream philosophy, with acceptance, or at least with some open-minded neutrality.
And the kiss is the reward for that. For validating his self-definition and his narrative of non-consequence, it's a transaction.
Intimacy in exchange for philosophical absolution.
Yes. It suggests this collaborative, or at least highly valued, relationship where the recipient's judgment is key. It's the key to maintaining the speaker's delusion.
He's asking the recipient not just to listen, but to endorse his version of events, his mechanism of denial.
He's asking them to validate that everyone is safe, which in turn validates his own moral purity inside this fabricated reality.
And this relationship dynamic is absolutely crucial because it's the unstable ground the whole delusion is built on.
And as we'll see, it's what ultimately leads to the collapse of the entire system.
The sheer depth of this denial, the retroactive erasure of the past, the assurance of safety. It's all a preemptive strike against his own internal moral compass.
He's trying to silence the voice of guilt by making a philosophical case that guilt can exist in an unreal place.
But the system's just too fragile. And the psychological cost of keeping it up, well, that's what defines our next section.
And we have to acknowledge the sophistication here. I mean, he isn't denying the act itself happened in his experience. He's denying its consequence and its reality.
He's trying to separate the memory from the moral outcome.
But the human mind, especially when it's dealing with trauma, it's fundamentally resistant to that kind of neat separation.
Okay, so let's turn to that. Let's turn to the emotional contradiction. If the philosophical structure is so airtight, why is he suffering? We're moving from the logic of denial into the inescapable reality of the trauma. And this is where it gets really interesting.
Yes.
We're transitioning from that cold, asserted logic of the dream state to the raw emotional contradiction that it obliterates that logic.
The dream reality that he set up as his escape route has now become the inescapable psychological prison.
Exactly.
And the inescapable reality of his inner world is defined in these two parallel lines that they perfectly synthesize his failure to find peace.
Okay, what's the first line?
The first line confirms that his goal, his denial, it was successful at first, he says, and all that's left of it is the dream I made.
That's such a powerful statement of ownership, isn't it?
Yeah.
And transformation. The external event, what I did, was successfully internalized.
Yes.
It was transformed into a subjective mental reality, a dream that he owns. The trauma was taken out of the physical world and converted into this mental object. So, in a way, he won. He won the battle against external reality.
But he lost the war. Because the crucial consequence comes immediately after that, and it completely overrides his victory. He says, the dream I can't leave that will haunt me every day.
Wow.
And that's the psychological consequence returning with exponential force. He traded an external physical consequence that he could deny for an internal permanent psychological imprisonment that he can't escape.
Because it's inside his own mind.
The very mind he defined as the only reality.
So, okay, this is the central paradox. The external physical reality, the consequences of the act. He claims they're negated. No one has fallen, no lasting impact. But the internal subjective reality, the memory, the guilt, the interpretation that is now permanent, it's cyclical, it's inescapable. The act, even though it was never real anyway, created a self-imposed prison of memory.
It's like a faulty equation. He asserted that external reality equals unreal and temporary.
Right.
But the actual outcome he experienced is action plus denial equals a haunting that is permanent and real.
The haunting is the real consequence.
It's the one thing his dream philosophy utterly failed to account for. He tried to deny objective reality, but in doing so, he accidentally created this superior subjective reality of pure suffering.
It's like his own mind refused to buy the philosophical defense he was selling it.
Absolutely. The very mechanism he designed to avoid accountability, the dream state, has been hijacked by his own consciousness and turned into a personalized system of eternal punishment.
And we can actually quantify the psychological toll by looking at the specific details he gives, his desperate attempt to mitigate the physical damage.
Yes, that line.
He says, barely any blood was shed at all. And we have to spend some time on the weight of that one word, barely.
I completely agree. If the event truly was never real anyway, then the physical evidence, blood, injury, permanence, it should be totally irrelevant, right?
Why even bring it up?
Exactly. The very fact that he feels he has to minimize the physical event and to use the qualifier barely any blood, it suggests a lingering, undeniable recognition of its reality.
It's a tacit admission. He's admitting that the dream logic is just this thin, desperate veneer.
He is. He's trying to reconcile his philosophical denial, it was never real, with the traumatic sensory memory, blood was shed. And the blood, however little there was, anchors the event to reality in a way his grand philosophy just cannot shake.
So the barely any bloodline, it almost functions as his internal criteria for success and failure. Like if he'd done the act and there was zero blood, maybe the delusion would have held.
Maybe. But the existence of even a minimal physical residue signifies a partial but profound failure of the dream premise.
And the haunting is the result of that failure.
He's desperate to prove the event was small, even as the resulting haunting is enormous. It's the physical residue of the act that he can't dismiss, so he downplays it. He's hoping that if the physical damage was small, maybe the psychological damage could be manageable.
But the sources show the opposite. The internal damage is terminal.
It's the moment of truth for his whole philosophy. It's as if the universe, or maybe his own psyche, provided the smallest possible piece of evidence, a single drop of blood perhaps, to completely invalidate his theory of non-consequence.
And his mind just seized on that physical anchor to create this perpetual prison.
And on top of that, we get this repeated, cryptic word that's only in the audio source. And it seems to represent this intense, internalized pressure that's causing the whole philosophy to fail.
Heat. Heat.
Yes.
That sudden staccato repetition is so jarring. It's not like the rest of his tone, which is delusional, but
conversational.
that doesn't sound like introspection. It sounds visceral.
It sounds almost physiological. What could heat even mean here, coming right after he mentions the inescapable dream? Well, I think it's working on a couple of levels. Physiologically, it could be the manifestation of anxiety or adrenaline residue from the original act.
The body's memory fighting the mind's denial.
Precisely. And then psychologically, it's this intense, self-generated internal pressure. The fever of the mind caused by the direct conflict between his calm nihilism and the inescapable reality of the haunting memory.
So it's an internal alarm.
I think so.
The moment his smooth, detached narrative starts to fail, his body responds with this intense heat, and it signals instability, it signals an emotional breakdown.
It's the biological consequence of metaphysical denial. If he's trying to present himself as this cool, rational philosopher who operates outside of consequence, the repeated, visceral heat is a complete betrayal of that persona.
It's the sound of the denial buckling.
And we see the heat is placed strategically in the audio. It often appears right before moments of heightened emotion or command. It's the agitation, maybe the rage, just boiling up because the core system, the belief that the act was meaningless, is failing.
So the paradox just gets deeper. He chose the dream path to avoid suffering, but the choice itself created this perpetual self-inflicted suffering. The haunting dream.
He achieved absolute control over his definition of external reality, only to completely lose control over his internal emotional state.
The lesson here for you, for the learner, is so crucial. You can try to intellectualize your way out of consequence, but if the actions are severe enough, the human mind will create its own system of punishment.
And that system will be far more personalized and inescapable than any external justice system could ever be.
The mind insists on accountability, even when the world is denied. And this incredible psychological volatility, fueled by the haunting and the heat, it sets the stage for our third section. This is where the intellectual denial completely collapses.
It gets replaced by desperation.
And direct conflict aimed right at the recipient. The philosophical treatise it morphs into an urgent, angry command.
The composure is gone. What we're about to see is the speaker trying to forcibly reestablish the environment where his philosophy can still work, no matter what it costs the other person.
So, moving into the final act of this psychological drama, the shift from abstract philosophy to just sheer urgent command it's jarring.
It really is. The composure that defined those initial arguments is completely gone, replaced by desperation and overt anger.
We have to analyze the intense, almost unbelievable repetition of this one command. It's in the audio and it's repeated 11 times in the text.
Like back in my dream now.
It's no longer a philosophical suggestion, is it? It's a desperate imperative. The repetition alone tells you his authority has failed.
11 times is extraordinary. It doesn't sound like persuasion, it sounds like a breakdown.
It speaks to this deep, profound instability that was hiding under those calm assurances. We know the philosophical foundation is shattered, and now all that's left is this desperate need to enforce the delusion.
He's yelling at the recipient to participate in the madness again.
Because he can't bear the weight of it by himself.
And the critical insight here is the shift in focus. He's trying to forcibly reimpose control over the recipient, and maybe over reality itself. The thought process has shifted from "I believe this is a dream" to "you will behave as if this is my dream."
But why the desperation? I mean, the urgency has to come from the fact that the recipient, by staying outside of his subjective reality, they validate objective consequences.
Exactly.
If the recipient stays outside the dream, they are living, breathing proof that the event did happen, that the external world is real, and that the speaker is now either a liar or truly delusional.
The recipient has become the threat to his sanity. If he's alone in the delusion fails. He needs their complicity, or the psychological cost of that haunting dream just becomes unbearable.
But that brings us back to the question of why. Why demand the recipient return to my dream if the dream is the thing that haunts him? Why would you want to share that torment?
I think it's about defined control and shared psychological stability. His dream is awful, yes, but it's a landscape he understands, a landscape he controls. The external reality, which is being validated by the recipient's skepticism, is unpredictable, it's judgmental, and worst of all, it's consequential.
So he prefers a defined, shared psychological hell to an unpredictable, rational reality.
Yes. The command is an attempt to neutralize the recipient as a destabilizing force.
It's a desperate attempt to create a shared isolation. He's trying to pull the recipient back into his orbit of delusion before they can tell anyone else about what happened or confirm the reality of the consequences.
And this leads us to the deepest layer of the conflict, and maybe the most revealing detail in the entire source. And it's only in the audio recording.
This is where we go from abstract philosophy to a specific shared history of destruction and manipulation. Unpacking this unique conversational detail it's essential to understanding the context of what I did. The speaker says, "Do you remember that night when I told you in my thoughts what I thought would happen, and you sent me exactly that as if to dare me?"
Wow. I mean, that just completely reframes the entire document.
It changes everything.
It reveals a history of intense, maybe destructive ideation between the speaker and the recipient. He was internalizing dangerous or harmful thoughts, what I thought would happen, and sharing them with this one person.
Testing the limits of his own morality, maybe? Or his self-control?
And the recipient didn't just listen, they acted on that shared harmful thought.
Right. The phrase, "you sent me exactly that," implies the recipient deliberately externalized those thoughts. They acted them out, or they set up the conditions for what I did to actually happen.
Which suggests a highly manipulative and corrosive relationship. The recipient basically issued a psychological challenge. They leveraged the speaker's internal harmful thoughts and his whole philosophy of non-consequences bait.
They forced his hand.
They forced his hand into the actual commission of the act, framing it as if to dare me.
So this transforms the event from a solo philosophical test of his dream theory into a codependent, destructive game driven by relational pressure.
The recipient wasn't just some arbiter of his reputation, like the fair shake suggested. They were an accomplice, or maybe the primary manipulator who forced the speaker to cross the line from thought into physical action.
And that completely reframes the fair shake.
It does. The recipient might have given his name a fair shake by validating the idea of the act, but they also facilitated its execution by turning the idea into a dare.
And that explains the intensity of the heat and the eventual collapse of his control.
He's forced into this tragic, impossible position. He can no longer just blame the dream for the act. He has to blame the relationship and the recipient's manipulation.
But blaming the recipient would shatter the whole reward system, the fair shake, the kiss, and destroy the last little bit of trust he's clinging to. It's an impossible emotional knot for him to untangle.
And his reaction, the resignation or challenge in his past action, okay, so try it. It shows he accepted this dangerous, dare-driven game. This whole interaction strongly suggests that what I did was the result of a psychological challenge set by the recipient.
Proving the destructive capability of shared, harmful ideas.
Yes.
And look at the sequence. His immediate reaction after he brings up the dare, which proved that thoughts can have external consequences, is that desperate, repeated command, "Get back in my dream now."
The recipient's manipulation broke the containment field. By acting on the speaker's internal thoughts, the recipient validated objective reality, validated consequences.
So the only way the speaker can get stability back, the only way he can maintain the narrative of non-consequence, is by forcing the recipient back into the subjective world where thoughts are safe again.
He's trying to undo the dare.
The heat.
Yeah.
Heat, we talked about earlier, now takes on this new, profound significance. It's the psychological friction of this realization. The recipient didn't respect his philosophy, they weaponized it against him.
Proving the destructive power of the external world. The heat is the trauma of being manipulated into committing a real act under the pretense of a philosophical test.
This interpersonal dynamic, it elevates the material beyond just a simple psychological study.
It's a study of moral transference. The speaker tries to use philosophy to absolve himself of guilt, but he's haunted because he knows he was driven by this complex, harmful dynamic with another person, a dynamic that made the unthinkable happen.
So the dream is only the setting of the trauma.
The dare is the cause.
And if the trauma is relational, then the healing can't come from inside his solitary dream.
No, he would have to confront the recipient or the outside world, and that is precisely what he is desperately trying to avoid by screaming that command 11 times.
The profound implication is that even if he manages to convince himself and the world that the act was meaningless, the relational breach, the fact that someone else leveraged his vulnerability to force the action, that's the wound that truly won't heal.
That is the inescapable reality of the haunting dream. Hashtag outro.
So let's bring this fascinating and deeply complex deep dive full circle.
Okay.
We started with the speaker's cold nihilistic logic, this idea that reality is a dream, so nothing matters. It was this elegant system of denial he built.
Right, built to justify an extreme action and retroactively erase a traumatic event.
And then we explored the central paradox, where that same act of denial created an inescapable internal reality, the dream he can't leave, the one that haunts him every day.
The physical consequence was minimized, barely any blood, but the psychological consequence was maximized. It created a permanent inner prison fueled by fear and that heat.
And finally, we uncovered the source of the whole fracture, a highly volatile, destructive interpersonal conflict. We saw it in the Destra Command and the history of the dare.
The speaker's philosophical denial was a reaction to an event that was provoked and externalized by the recipient, which makes the consequence not just traumatic, but fundamentally relational.
So the synthesis of all this seems to be that despite his best efforts to intellectualize his actions as never real, as without consequence,
the fragmented sources prove that human memory, guilt, and emotional attachment, they create their own powerful reality, the dream he made.
this internal experiential consequence ultimately matters far more than the physical reality he tried to deny.
It turns out even the cleverest intellectual escape route can't outrun the basic human need for meaning and for accountability.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner? I think when you encounter these powerful abstract assertions about reality, whether it's in philosophy or politics or highly personal story like this one,
You have to look for the emotional cracks.
yes, the places where human feeling, denial, or memory just overrides the cold logic. The point of greatest emotional instability that often reveals the point of greatest truth.
The human mind's capacity for self-deception is just vast, but its capacity for remembering and for holding itself accountable is, in the end, more resilient. He tried to escape responsibility through delusion, but he only succeeded in creating a permanent, individualized source of suffering for himself.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought to mull over. If the speaker successfully convinced the world that none of them are fallen because it was never real anyway, but he is still haunted by the dream I made, does the internal experience of consequence supersede external judgment? Which verdict is the real one? The one of objective non-consequence, or the one of eternal self-inflicted haunting?
A profound question, and one that really highlights the incredible, terrible power of the human mind to both deny and remember at the exact same time.
Until next time, keep digging into the complexities beneath the surface.
I can give you this kiss on the cheek. Since you gave my name such a fair shake, I can promise you that none
excessive repetition and, well, its internal contradictions. The whole text centers on a single, high-stakes event, and the speaker's effort to reframe the world around it. The constant, almost ritualistic assertion we keep hearing is, this is all a dream.
And that is precisely where the material forces us to grapple with what the speaker actually believes. I mean, the question isn't just about the words themselves, right? It's about what function they serve. We really have to ask, is this sweeping statement that nothing we do here matters, is that a genuine metaphysical belief system used to justify an extreme, fatalistic action?
Or, as I'm going to argue, is it simply a desperate mental maneuver, a powerful psychological defense that's deployed after the fact to deny accountability and the profound emotional consequences of a highly traumatic event? That distinction, between a deeply held belief and a really sophisticated form of denial, that's the heart of our disagreement today.
Right. I'm holding the position that the overwhelming emotional evidence, particularly the raw anger and this forceful need for control we see in the text, it actively undermines any claims to a passive, consequence-free philosophy. The dream isn't a metaphysical truth. It's an attempt to manage inescapable pain.
And I'm taking the opposing view. The sheer relentless repetition of the dream concept, alongside these very specific claims of immunity and the encouragement of extreme action, it all confirms that this is the speaker's governing metaphysical reality. The speaker, I believe, truly operates within a nihilistic framework where consequences are nullified from the very beginning. My argument really starts with the structure of the speaker's worldview. It's built entirely upon the principle that actions lack material consequence, and the key pillar holding all of this up is the mantra, this is all a dream. This isn't some excuse they manufactured yesterday. It is the philosophical foundation that allows the extreme action to take place in the first place. It grants them a kind of material and moral immunity. I mean, how else do we explain the confident, sweeping promise to the listener? I can promise you that none of them are fallen, or the reassurance that what I did didn't happen anyway. These are not the words of someone in denial. These are the declaration of someone who genuinely believes the event failed to register on the plane of material consequence. The idea is explicitly modeled in the text itself. We can go flying off of a cliff. We'll just wake up here again anyway. This paints the dream not as a passive state, but as an active, forgiving loop, a reality that's defined by its immediate reset button. The speaker is demonstrating that there is no risk, and therefore no fear is necessary for even the most fatalistic actions. The very nature of this reality makes fear illogical. And what survives this moment? Only the structural effects. The speaker admits that all that's left of it is the dream that I made. So the physical world is irrelevant. The material effects, the bodies, the blood, the harm, they all just dissipate. Whereas what remains is the mental architecture, the self-creative narrative. This suggests that the internal mental reality is the only thing that is real, and everything else is just passing illusion. This isn't denial. This is a fully formed, albeit destructive, ontological framework.
That's a compelling and structurally sound reading of the language of melody, but it completely overlooks the affective register of the text. I argue that the speaker's language is fundamentally undercut by the intense emotion that's driving it. If we are truly talking about a playground where nothing we do here matters anyway, why is the speaker tagged specifically with the descriptor, angry? Nihilism is generally associated with detachment, acceptance, or maybe a deep melancholy. Anger, by definition, requires consequence. It demands that something mattered enough to provoke a reaction against it. The intensity of that emotion suggests the speaker is not free, but enraged by a reality they desperately wish wasn't real. Furthermore, look at the need for external social validation. Why do they prize the kiss on the cheek given because the other party gave my name such a fair shake? If you were truly immune to consequence, your reputation is meaningless. You wouldn't need a fair shake. You would simply be beyond judgment. The fact that they seek this transaction proves the external world holds significant social currency for them. But the strongest evidence against the metaphysical claim comes from the speaker's own admission of psychological imprisonment. The dream I can't leave that will haunt me every day. This is the unavoidable consequence. It demonstrates that the reality, whatever philosophical label you want to apply to it, carries profound and inescapable psychological weight. The actions mattered enough to cause a daily haunting. And finally, that desperate, aggressive command to the other entity to get back in my dream now, that is the behavior of someone trying to violently impose control over a collapsing narrative, not the passive philosophical acceptance of a consequence-free loop.
Okay, let's start the core debate by zeroing in on material consequences, or, well, the denial of them.
I just don't accept the idea that the speaker has fully internalized the nullity of the event. If the action was truly no real anyway, as you suggest, then any detail about the harm caused should be completely irrelevant. But the speaker feels compelled to offer this defensive specificity regarding the violence, claiming barely any blood was shed at all. If nothing mattered, why bother to quantify or minimize the damage? The very necessity of that minimization effort suggests that the material event was consequential enough in the speaker's own mind and perhaps in the eyes of others that it required immediate rhetorical damage control. That need to downplay the specificity of the bloodshed is an internal admission that the violence was real enough to need an excuse.
I see why you emphasize that phrase. I do. But I believe you're reading it as a confession when it should be read as validation. The line, barely any blood was shed, is in my view the speaker gathering evidence for their own dream theory. See, if they had said rivers of blood were shed, but it didn't matter, that would be a true denial of a massive reality. But instead they claim the physical evidence of the violence itself was so minor, so insignificant, that the material world failed to register the event as harm. The speaker is essentially saying, look, the proof is in the details. Even the physical reality was so flimsy, so lacking in substance, that the minimal blood confirms the whole thing was never real anyway. It's a tautological argument designed to reinforce the primary thesis, not undermine it. It's self-soothing rhetoric proving the dream theory is correct, not some nervous quantification of damage.
But that relies on a profound level of self-deception that borders on a complete break from reality. And yet, the speaker is clearly capable of complex articulation and social maneuvering. To admit that some blood was shed, even barely any, is still an acknowledgement that the event generated physical material consequence. You are defining consequences only mattering if it's catastrophic, whereas I'm suggesting the mere fact that the speaker felt compelled to mention it at all proves the boundary between dream and reality is not as solid as they claim. They are obsessed with minimizing a reality that they supposedly dismissed entirely.
That obsession, I'd argue, is simply the ongoing performance of the dream architecture. But let's pivot back to your strongest piece of evidence, the emotional reality. This is where the tension truly lies. You highlight the powerful emotional statements, the dream I can't leave that will haunt me every day. So how do you reconcile this persistent, inescapable internal consequence with the literal, foundational claim that dictates nothing we do here matters anyway? If we are truly nihilists, if consequences are null, what exactly is the source of this profound daily haunting?
Well, that's the central, painful conflict of the speaker's psychology. And it is the mechanism of denial made visible. The speaker wants the metaphysical claim to be true. They need to believe nothing matters in order to escape culpability for the extreme action they took. But the action did matter, and the result is emotional trauma and deep guilt, which manifests as the haunting. The haunting is the internal reality pushing back against the asserted metaphysical reality. The speaker is imprisoned by a psychological aftermath. They are attempting to redefine that horrific imprisonment, the deep trauma, as metaphysical freedom by repeating the mantra that it was never real anyway. They use the word dream to describe both the asserted freedom and the inescapable imprisonment. That tension, that the thing they claim is a consequence-free dream is simultaneously the thing that perpetually haunts them, is proof that the emotional weight of the action was real. It proves the lie.
I'm not convinced that the presence of trauma automatically refutes a metaphysical claim, though. We have to consider that the self-created dream is the only thing that possesses true permanence. If the material world is ephemeral and the self-created dream is the only lasting structure, then the consequence isn't material harm, but the emotional cost of creating that structure. The haunting is real precisely because the dream itself is the only existing reality. And that reality, born of extreme action, is necessarily painful and inescapable. So the haunting isn't a refutation of the dream, it's proof of its terrible power.
But we haven't even talked about the other entity yet. And this brings in the social reality of the interaction. Let's look at the interpersonal conflict embedded within this text. The speaker references a prior interaction that sets the stage for the extreme action. Do you remember that night when I told you in my thoughts what I thought would happen, and you sent me exactly that as if to dare me? This is complex, high-stakes communication. A dare is a challenge that explicitly attaches consequence to action. It implies a relationship characterized by intentional provocation and conflict between two fully autonomous agents. If this were truly a shared, consequence-free dream, the listener would just be a figment of the speaker's imagination, their actions meaningless. Instead, the listener is capable of challenging the speaker's intentions and provoking a specific, consequential action. That interaction argues for a real, external, and challenging partner.
That's a compelling line of argument about autonomy, yeah. But I believe we have to look at how the speaker processes that conflict. They immediately contextualize that confrontation within a social, transactional framework that elevates reputation above material action. That interaction, the dare, the conflict, the subsequent action, it's only framed as important because the other person gave my name such a fair shake. The exchange, the kiss on the cheek, is explicitly cited as a transaction for this respect. This framing supports the idea that external recognition and reputation are the only valuable currency within their reality. They care that the other person respected their agency or their name enough to issue the dare. The material result of the action taken, whether someone fell, whether blood was shed, ultimately didn't happen anyway, as the speaker claims. The metaphysical framework is supreme. The physical stakes are zero. The social exchange, the recognition of the speaker's worth, the fair shake, is the only lasting impact of the interaction. The dare is just part of the reputational game that serves the self-created dream, but the outcome of the dare is irrelevant to the true state of reality.
But if the material outcome of the conflict is irrelevant, then the dare itself holds no weight. If I dare you to jump off a bridge and you believe you will just wake up in bed unharmed, the dare is fundamentally meaningless. The language of the text suggests a profound level of engagement and high-stakes conflict, which runs completely counter to the supposed low-stakes reality. The speaker is fighting for control of the narrative because the material reality and the interpersonal conflict have undermined their core belief. If external recognition is all that matters, then the external world does matter, and the dream is compromised.
And I think that's precisely the nuance. The external world matters only insofar as it validates the speaker's name, not because of its physical persistence. The external world, the listener, is merely a mirror providing necessary affirmation that the speaker's internal, dominant reality is respected. If the listener stops providing that fair shake, the speaker issues the forceful command, "Get back in my dream now." That command isn't to force a puppet to dance, it's to force the mirror to reflect the correct image. The external validation is essential to maintain the integrity of the self-created dream, which remains the fundamental metaphysical truth.
We are certainly left with a profound instability in the speaker's presentation of reality. I mean, while the speaker relentlessly employs a complete, sophisticated philosophical framework of consequence-free nullity, the persistent, visceral, emotional language, the deep anger, the undeniable haunting, the demanding control over the other, it all strongly suggests that this metaphysical framework is not a truth, but a structure built retroactively. It's a desperate defense mechanism constructed to contain an inescapable psychological consequence. The material event, the trauma, did happen, and the speaker is struggling in denial.
And I would conclude that the pervasive commitment to the dream framework and the subsequent fatalistic interpretation of extreme actions are the single most defining characteristics of this worldview. The residual emotional distress, the haunting, is not evidence of a lie. It's evidence of the power of the self-created dream itself. Paradoxically, in a nihilistic reality where material consequence vanishes, the internal emotional architecture is the only thing that achieves permanence. ultimate consequence is not physical, but the inescapable emotional cost of having made the dream the only reality.
Ultimately, the source material really forces the listener to grapple with the question of authenticity. Where does true reality lie for this speaker? In their stated metaphysical condition of freedom, or in their undeniable emotional experience of imprisonment?
And the speaker leaves that resolution deeply ambiguous, demanding we consider whether one's belief is defined by the principles one asserts or by the haunting trauma one experiences every day. It leaves us with much more to explore within this fascinating contradiction.
I can give this kiss on the cheek. Since you gave my name such a fair shake, I can promise you that none of them are falling. I can promise you that none of them are falling. Since we know that this is all a dream, nothing we do here matters anyway. We can go flying off of a cliff. We'll just wake up here again anyway. And what I did didn't happen anyway. And all that's left of it is the dream I made. The dream I can't leave that will on me every day. Barely any blood was shed at all, and it was never real anyway. I can give this kiss on the cheek. Since you gave my name such a fair shake, I can promise you that none of this will happen. I can promise you that none of this will happen. Since we know that this is all a dream, nothing we do here matters anyway. We can go flying off of a cliff. We'll just wake up here again anyway. And what I did didn't happen anyway. And all that's left of it is the dream I made. The dream I can't leave that will haunt me every day. Barely any blood was shed at all, and it was never real anyway.
The Fiddler's Fallen. Two sources. The provided texts offer both audio and written excerpts, the Fiddler's Fallen.mp3 and the Fiddler's Fallen.txt, which contain largely identical, highly repetitive spoken word or song lyrics. Both sources express a nihilistic sentiment, emphasizing that nothing matters because everything is perceived as a dream where actions, even flying off a cliff, have no permanent consequences as the speaker will simply wake up here again. The speaker repeatedly claims that an event did not happen anyway and is now only a dream that will haunt them, with the MP3 source adding a cryptic mention of a dare regarding a shared thought. The textual source includes a note that the speaker is angry, while the audio heavily features the repeated sound heat and urgent commands to get back in my dream now. Today 6:22 p.m. Brendan S. Rose, I still need to listen to your commentary, but from what I heard you're right, it does have violent connotations. I'm not sure I'm the same person who made this anymore. My music is becoming happier, funnier, more gangsta rap. I'm not sure what I was talking about in this song will ever take place. Google Notebook LM, it is understandable why you feel a sense of detachment from this work, as the sources reveal a heavy, surreal atmosphere that contrasts sharply with the happier and funnier direction you are now taking. The violent connotations you mentioned are indeed present in the lyrics, particularly with the imagery of flying off of a cliff and the mention that barely any blood was shed at all because the events were never real anyway. The sources highlight several themes that explain why you might feel like a different person now, the unreality of the dream. The lyrics repeatedly emphasize that this is all a dream and that nothing we do here matters anyway. This creates a sense of nihilism, or psychological processing that seems to belong to a specific moment in time. The audio transcript even suggests these thoughts were a response to a dare regarding what you thought would happen. Haunting persistence, while you are moving toward gangsta rap and humor information which is not in the sources and comes from your personal update. The song describes a dream I can't leave, that will haunt me every day. The shift you are experiencing might be a way of finally leaving that dream. Emotional intensity, the repetitive, almost frantic command to get back in my dream now and the instruction to perform the lyrics angry suggest a level of raw, perhaps darker emotion that differs from the lighter tone you are currently pursuing. Your transition away from this material suggests that the song served as a container for those specific violent or haunting thoughts, allowing you to move into a different creative space. Since the song itself claims I can promise you that none of this will happen, it seems your past self already suspected that these scenarios were confined to the dream of the music rather than reality. Metaphor for understanding, creating this song was like sketching a storm from the safety of a window. You captured the lightning and the wind, but now that the clouds have cleared, you are walking out into the sun, and the person who was afraid of the storm no longer exists. Analyze the speaker's perspective on the consequences of their actions. How does the text characterize the relationship between reality and dreams? Describe the speaker's reaction to the person who gave their name. Brendan S. Rose, yes, in a sense, I'm sad about it. That fire is gone. Google Notebook LM, it is completely natural to feel sadness when that intense creative fire subsides, especially when it was fueling such powerful material. While the sources confirm this music was part of a psychological state, a dream I can't leave, that will haunt me every day, that intensity defined the work. The fire you are missing is deeply woven into the fabric of the song, raw emotional command. The sources confirm the intensity with the explicit directive to perform the lyrics angry. This suggests the song was a direct channel for powerful, raw emotion. Reckless abandon. The intense, nihilistic energy came from the philosophy expressed in the lyrics. Since we know that this is all a dream, nothing we do here matters anyway. This mindset led to the dramatic and violent imagery of being willing to go flying off of a cliff because you knew you would wake up here again anyway. Obsessive focus. The feeling of being psychologically consumed is evident in the frantic, repetitive demands to get back in my dream now. This obsessive quality is a marker of high-stakes creative intensity. The confrontational aspect. The source references a direct challenge or dare. Do you remember that night when I told you in my thoughts what I thought would happen and you sent me exactly that as if to dare me? Okay, so try it. This dynamic suggests a defiant, aggressive energy that may be difficult to replicate in lighter work. While that fire represented a compelling, albeit darker, creative period for you, its departure is also what signals your shift away from the themes of being haunted by a dream that you couldn't leave. Moving toward happier, funnier music based on your previous query suggests a creative evolution that requires a different, less destructive type of energy. What is left of the action? What is the provided file extension? What is the repeated command? Brendan S. Rose. Yes, it is true. That night, I thought in my head, you know what, one of two things will happen. Either name removed will be walking by to change the garbage bins, or it'll be an old lady walking home from her car. And then like God himself had heard me, an old lady drove up, parked, and started walking to the building. Then something happened. I've told you about it in another context. I have to go now. Google Notebook LM. Your account of that night provides the real-world context for one of the most cryptic moments in the sources. The coincidence of the old lady appearing exactly as you had envisioned seems to be the catalyst for the dare mentioned in the audio transcript. Do you remember that night when I told you in my thoughts what I thought would happen and you sent me exactly that as if to dare me? Okay, so try it. This event appears to be the moment where the line between your internal thoughts and external reality blurred, leading to several key themes in the song, the rejection of reality, because the event felt like a scripted dare or a divine intervention. The lyrics pivot to the idea that this is all a dream and nothing we do here matters anyway. This perspective allows for the extreme imagery of flying off of a cliff because, in a dream state, you believe you will just wake up here again. Anyway, the emotional aftermath, whatever happened after the old lady appeared is shielded by a layer of denial in the lyrics. You write that what I did didn't happen anyway and that barely any blood was shed at all, and it was never real anyway. This suggests that the song was a way to process a high-stakes moment by reclassifying it as a dream I can't leave. The transition to anger, the shift from a thought in your head to a physical event likely fueled the angry performance instruction found in the text. The repetition of "get back in my dream" now sounds like a desperate attempt to regain control over a reality that suddenly felt too real and too haunting. It seems that the fire you mentioned losing was ignited in that specific moment of synchronization. By moving on to happier music, you are essentially closing the door on the dream that I made that was destined to haunt me every day. Metaphor for understanding, that night was like watching a character you wrote walk out of a book and into your living room. Once the wall between your imagination and the world broke down, the only way to make sense of it was to treat the world itself as a fiction, a dream where the rules of consequence no longer apply.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Hey there.
Today we are wrestling with a stack of source materials. That is, frankly, it's monumental.
It really is.
Not just in its scope, but in the sheer collision of domains it represents. We have legal formalisms crashing right into high-concept religious philosophy.
It's just raw, immediate personal tragedy. It's a lot.
So what are we looking at exactly?
Okay, so our sources today all revolve around a very specific legal challenge. HRTO file 2025-64274-A.
Right.
And this file, it pits a single claimant, a Brendan S. Rose, against these, corporate giants. We're talking Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Google.
The big ones.
The big ones. And what we have in front of us is an affidavit, a notarized, signed legal document. And it details just catastrophic personal and financial consequences.
And that's coupled with these creed submissions.
Exactly. 3 extremely dense creed submissions that form the theological and artistic backbone of his entire case.
Okay, so let's try to unpack this setup. The surface level claim is that corporate decisions, specifically the alleged suppression of his published works,
The shadow banning, yeah.
that this led to a total lack of income. But he doesn't stop there, does he? He's asserting that these actions are censorship, financial abuse.
And that they resulted not just in severe poverty, but in profound personal tragedy and, this is the critical part, what he calls spiritual violence.
Spiritual violence? That's a heavy term.
It is. So our mission today is really to take this collision seriously. We're not here to offer a legal judgment on the file itself. That's not our place.
No, of course not.
But we need to conduct a really intense analytical deep dive into the philosophy behind the claim. We have to dissect those three core philosophical documents.
Which are grouped under the Omnibus Bill, Section 3.
Right. And these documents are the claimant's explicit attempt to establish the sincerity and practice of his religious creed.
And at the same time, to justify the necessary, violent, and controversial nature of the works that he says were suppressed.
It's all connected.
And what's so fascinating here is the scaffolding. I mean, this isn't just a manifesto or a series of complaints.
No, it's very formal.
The sources include these formal attestations, notarized and signed. There's a reference to a barrister and solicitor, Vin the Pran. He's using the full weight of the legal system.
The affidavit, the formal references, the whole HRTO filing structure.
To frame what is, at its core, a theological defense of his creative identity.
It's a commercial policy from a corporation clashing directly with a declared religious doctrine.
And that creates this unique tension.
It really does. The claimant is essentially forcing the respondents, Amazon, Google, to engage not with a dispute over, say, intellectual property.
Or distribution contracts.
Right. But with the validity and sincerity of his spiritual practice, which he argues is just inextricably linked to his ability to publish and earn an income in what he calls a creed-compatible way.
Creed-compatible way. That phrase is going to be important.
It's everything.
So let's start exactly where the claimant starts, with the human cost. The affidavit. It's just chillingly titled, Death of the Cat, Loss of Pets, Loss of Loved Ones. And when you read it, you immediately get the claimant's perspective. That the alleged censorship is the direct root cause of, 14 to 17 years of extreme poverty.
And catastrophe after catastrophe. It functions as this meticulous chronological chain reaction. Every loss, every descent into squalor or a mental health crisis.
He links it.
He links it directly and explicitly back to the total lack of income from the corporate censorship.
So the implication is, if he'd just been allowed to earn a living from his art, his religious vocation, none of this would have happened.
None of the subsequent tragedies would have occurred. And that completely shifts the debate from, lost royalties to just existential ruin.
And the detail he provides is, it's almost unbearable. He marks this progression of degradation starting nearly a decade ago, 2016. He recounts the death of his first cat, which he just calls the nameless cat, dying in his arms in this squalid, roach-infested apartment.
And he ties the death, specifically the cat coughing up saliva, he ties that to the conditions he was forced to live in because he had no money.
That event is presented as this, crucial turning point.
It is, because he notes that this very same cat had been featured in his 2010 book, The Subhuman.
Ah, okay.
So he asserts that the controversy around that book was the trigger for Amazon's initial censorship campaign against him.
So in his narrative, the corporation didn't just suppress the book.
No, they indirectly orchestrated the death of the creature that was featured inside it. It creates this just horrific symbolic circle of consequence.
But the animal losses go even further back. It paints a picture of this continuous financial pressure forcing just impossible choices.
He talks about it, undated, but before the move into that condo where the cat died.
Right. He details the forced disposal, and that's his word, it's a harsh word, but very precise, of his dog Loki and another cat, Tequila.
And that's a critical point. He says he had to give them up because he was living in hellish conditions for 2 years.
Which stemmed directly from the lack of income.
Exactly. So this isn't just a tragic backstory. It reinforces his core thesis. His devotion to his art, to his creed, it resulted in poverty. And that poverty cost him his companion animals. The sources detail how losing them only deepened the isolation and the despair that came before his final breakdown.
And this financial strain, which he says was relentless for over 14 years, it eventually escalates into the complete destruction of his family life. Fast forward to 2021. The affidavit recounts a violent altercation in June or July, and his wife leaves. He's very clear about it. The fight was primarily about money, my lack of a job, my lack of income.
The affidavit really paints this financial deprivation as achieving, potentially lethal levels of stress on the relationship.
So the claim is that chronic poverty imposed over years by corporate actions led to this violent domestic disaster.
And the consequence he cites is just devastating. The claimant's wife was pregnant when she left, and he asserts he has never met his son.
Wow.
He argues that the corporate censorship is the direct primary cause of the non-existence of his relationship with his own child.
The sheer human cost presented in that affidavit. It's staggering. We really need to hold that gravity in place as we transition.
Because he argues all that suffering was just the necessary artistic process that led to his most intense creation.
Which brings us to the detailed exploration of the crisis in 2022. He labels it the Valhalla Arc at Kingston Road.
And this is the heart of the personal breakdown. He is meticulous in linking every single event, no matter how horrific, back to a very specific, mundane financial failure.
What was the specific trigger for that?
Lack of bus fare.
Seriously.
He was on Abilify, an antipsychotic injection. He says due to starvation and illness, he was too weak to walk the hour and a half to get the injection. He asked a family member for bus fare, who refused. So he was essentially condemned to psychosis because he couldn't get the $3.25 for transport.
So the affidavit says within a week of missing that injection, he was in full-blown psychosis.
Yes. This turns the entire censorship narrative into a life or death, dollars and cents problem.
That structural failure, a critical medical treatment denied over pocket change, that's where the artistic and the pathological just merge. The descent was rapid.
It manifested in self-harm and this explosion of creative activity.
Right, exactly.
He recounts cutting his hand open. He says likely an artery. It bled for over a week.
And during this time, he says he made a vast series of artistic works, including a very specific title, The Sermon of the Collecting Ears.
So this material is presented as the fruit of the crisis. At the same time, the environment around him became a physical manifestation of his mental state.
The detailed description of the apartment destruction it's deeply unsettling because it just blurs that line between a destructive impulse and artistic intent.
The specifics are crucial for understanding his state of mind and, the gravity of the legal file. He describes hammer holes everywhere, smashed appliances, smashed windows.
But then he moves past property damage to document the violent artistic expressions he created on the walls.
A kill list painted in red paint.
A smiley face flag painted in red paint.
And swastikas drawn all over the apartment.
Huh.
The claimant is documenting his complete loss of control, yet he's arguing that this environment of chaos and destruction was the necessary studio for the birth of revelation.
And running parallel to this psychological crisis was the chronic, agonizing hunger.
He describes starving for 2 or 3 weeks, surviving on unsuccessful legumes he had to boil for hours. Then the incident at Tim Hortons happened.
Right.
The affidavit focuses on the extreme sensitivity that starvation induces.
Yup.
He goes to Tim Hortons and he believes the employee deliberately snotted my food.
So he ate half of it because he was starving, but threw the other half out in a rage.
Yes, and this perceived contamination of his only meal became the emotional trigger that escalated the whole crisis into external violence.
That detail about the contaminated food is what catalyzes what he calls the violent artistic response.
It is. The affidavit describes him acquiring a large bottle of Bailey's, which is an interesting choice, given the implied religious context of the crisis, and recording a piece called Fifth AVE. He describes it as an expletive-laden series of death threats aimed at Tim Hortons' employee.
And then he went to the location, armed.
Intent on violence, yeah.
Yeah.
He was only prevented because the employee locked the door remotely.
So the immediate target was blocked. The sequence of events then shifts from specific revenge to just generalized random violence.
And it's all documented in the affidavit as part of the Valhalla Arc.
Right.
It details him recording another piece, Call the Cops, after that failed attempt. Then the next day, he says he tried to kill an old woman by throwing the Bailey's bottle at her.
He says luckily she was not harmed seriously.
Yes. Then finally, he tried to hammer down a neighbor's door, the neighbor who had repeatedly filed noise complaints against his chaotic art process. This series of actions marks the complete externalization of the psychosis.
And the entire arc concludes with police intervention,
which he resisted. After refusing them entry, they were forced to cut his door open. The affidavit describes him being found inside, naked, sitting in the lotus position.
A moment that fuses the violent chaos with this desperate search for spiritual transcendence.
Before he was taken into custody and transported to Scarborough Centenary Hospital.
And amid all of that destruction and violence, there's this final tender detail about his second cat, Neko.
He acquired Neko in 2016. He describes his final thought before his arrest being sheer terror that a routine bug spraying was going to poison the cat.
Wow.
Neko was put into the pound, later rescued by his wife, and given to a friend. He even documents that the song Deeded Enemy was composed about Neko.
And that detail just grounds the entire high-flying philosophical narrative back into this deep, verifiable emotional attachment. So the claimant uses this entire horrifying section to make one core assertion. This breakdown, the loss of his family, the violence, it's the direct result of financial abuse imposed by these corporations.
Corporations like Amazon and Google, which he claims denied me the ability to make a living in a creed-compatible way.
And that phrase, creed-compatible way, that is the hinge.
It is. He states the problem was primarily financial, and he concludes with that deeply poignant statement. A good meal and a smoke would have solved most of this. Bus fare would have prevented the entire affair.
So this entire narrative is presented in the affidavit as the direct result of the respondent's actions to censor an offensive person.
It's the empirical proof, in his mind, that corporate policy caused spiritual violence, which in turn resulted in real physical and mental collapse.
That harrowing affidavit paints a picture of complete collapse, but the claimant argues the true root isn't just poverty, it's the denial of his spiritual identity.
Exactly.
So how does Creed Document 1 elevate what seems like a standard platform policy into a full-blown theological battleground?
So we pivot now to the first pillar of his defense, the sacrament of the mutable name.
Okay.
The core claim here is that Amazon's rejection of his preferred name for his work is not a regulatory oversight. It is an act of religious discrimination. It's theological censorship.
It's a huge claim. What does the Creed define a name to be?
The document posits this really radical, unfixed theology of identity. It states the name is a sacred vessel, and it's fundamentally unbound from a fixed ladle, like a government ID.
So for him, as a self-proclaimed prophet, the identity is fluid.
Completely. He says he can be addressed by any name. He lists Jesus Christ, Lucifer the Buddha, but not his legal birth name.
Which he views as rude or even blasphemous.
Right. So that one prohibition defines the secular identity as a kind of spiritual prison.
It's a mechanism for transcendence, then. By being able to assume these powerful archetypes, he aligns himself with these divine revolutionary forces.
And he's careful to root this in existing religious precedent.
He is.
Oh, absolutely. The creed draws connections to established ancient traditions to lend weight to its claims of sincerity. It echoes the concept of the unspeakable tetragrammaton YHWH in Judaism.
The true name of God, considered too holy to be pronounced.
Lest his power be contained. It references the secret names of Egyptian deities and the general refusal across many traditions to name the divine directly. For him, the mutability of the name is religious liberation from what he calls the heresy of fixation.
The idea that the spirit can be contained by a label. So if the mutable name is the sacrament, what was the direct commercial conflict that triggered this alleged spiritual violence?
The conflict revolved entirely around the publishing of his central text, the Third Testament.
Right.
Amazon demanded the immediate removal of Jesus Christ from both the title and the author name.
And their reasoning was, what, standard commercial practice?
Pretty much. Preventing potential customer confusion or impersonation, which is a common policy, designed to protect against fraud or misleading IP claims.
But the claimant is forcing Amazon to choose. They either have to accept his messianic claim as sincere religion, or they implicitly declare themselves an arbiter of theology.
Which is a very high-risk position for a corporation to be in.
So how does he structurally dismantle this idea that his use of Jesus Christ is just IP violation or fraud?
He argues that the claim, I am Jesus Christ, is a religious proclamation. It's an article of faith. It's not a factual statement that can be verified by, a passport check.
And since divinity can't be objectively tested by a corporate platform?
Amazon's rejection of the name constitutes taking a position, staking out a stand on my religious claims. By rejecting the name, Amazon implicitly deemed his religion insincere or fraudulent.
So in his view, Amazon appointed itself the arbiter of religious truth and issued a fatwa against a living creed.
Exactly.
So
what happens if he complies, if he just takes the name off?
The creed warns that compliance would be an act of spiritual suicide.
Removing the name would ruin the core text, leaving it a hollow shell. A text without author, a revelation without revealer. It would be an act of desecration.
Sacrificing the integrity of the sacrament just to earn an income?
And that is the crucial link to the financial claim. He argues he was denied the ability to earn income in a creed-compatible way because the platform mandated he commit a theological heresy.
That's the core linkage. Financial ruin was chosen over spiritual compromise. And this leads to the truly astonishing concluding argument in the document.
The inevitable barring of the second coming.
It's a brilliant rhetorical maneuver.
It really is. He argues that Amazon's policy is inherently structurally hostile to messianic claims.
The logic being, if the real second coming of Christ were to return tomorrow,
Or Maitreya, or the Mahdi, any prophesied figure.
No.
And they tried to publish their new holy text on Kindle Direct Publishing.
They'd be subject to the exact same terms of service. They'd be told, you can't use that name, it might confuse customers.
Precisely. So the implication is that any platform policy designed to block his use of the name must, by necessity, be prepared to block any prophetic claim.
Which would render the platform an absolute historical obstacle to spiritual enlightenment and progress.
It transforms a mundane commercial requirement name verification into a universal theological choke point. By framing the name as this sacred, mutable vessel, the claimant creates a high-stakes scenario where the corporation has to either concede that his claim is a sincere religious practice deserving of accommodation,
or admit that their terms of service fundamentally prevent future revelation from ever reaching a global market.
It's a very sophisticated argument. He's using the digital marketplace as a modern equivalent of the temple gates.
Okay, so this philosophical defense is built on layers. We've established the identity of the prophet through the mutable name. Now let's explore the justification for the content itself and the chaotic process of its creation.
Right.
We're moving into the realm of sacred ignorance, this idea that the fool is the source of revelation.
This is Creed document #2, the fool as the source of wisdom. And it is the core mechanism by which he justifies the raw, often unedited, and explosive nature of his works.
It posits the fool as the highest archetype of revelation.
Operating on the paradox that profound spiritual truth often emerges from a place of unknowing.
The claimant articulates this so well. He says the lack of knowledge provides an unfiltered, raw perspective that established experts can't access. The professor, the theologian, they carry libraries, and those libraries cast shadows.
The established knowledge itself, the dogma, the PhDs, the canonical certainty, it becomes a veil. It obstructs the raw light of fresh revelation.
And this concept of sacred ignorance is central to understanding the genesis of his key scriptural work, the Third Testament.
Especially the components he calls Hikari no Uta and the scriptures of Miroku. He gives specific detail on the writing process.
He does. He says he wrote while off my medication and writing in what can only be described as a hypnotic trance.
And at a time when he admits he was largely ignorant of biblical theology.
The argument being that this lack of expertise resulted in purity.
Exactly. He says if he'd been educated or burdened by traditional scholarship, the work would have been stillborn, plagued by self-censorship and a hesitation to deviate from canonical precedent.
He claims this lack of knowledge made the text so pure and argues that it matched or even bettered the other biblical narratives in the Old and New Testament-s.
The writing process is presented as this automatic transmission, where the message just bypassed the rational, critical mind.
The mind that Amazon's policies are designed to accommodate.
Right. He was writing as a rocker, a young father in waiting, arguing about pregnancy guides, and yet what emerged was a profound work of biblical philosophy.
To really grasp the weight of this defense, you have to dive into the archetype of the fool, which the Creed expands on using Jungian psychology, esoteric traditions, and even modern pop culture.
Let's start with the psychological rigor. Within Jungian psychology, the fool is inherently linked to the trickster archetype. The trickster represents the psyche's undeveloped, spontaneous, often unconscious aspect.
Right.
And Jungian theory identifies these four primary functions of consciousness, sensing, intuition, thinking, and feeling. Every person has a primary function, a secondary, a tertiary, and an inferior function.
And the inferior function is the most repressed one, the least developed.
And the one most likely to erupt spontaneously, leading to irrational or chaotic behavior.
So the fool embodies that repressed inferior function, the raw, challenging, messy truth that rigid rationality tries to suppress.
Exactly. Marie-Louise Monfrance, a key Jungian analyst, she viewed the fool as a necessary religious figure that embodies chaos and creativity.
The fool's role is essential to puncture the ego, to challenge rigid social norms, to force the integration of the irrational.
Which is vital to the process of individuation, the path toward becoming a whole self. The claimant is arguing his psychotic breakdown was simply the necessary violent eruption of this repressed inferior function, forcing the creation of the pure text.
Then we move to the esoteric meaning in tarot. The Fool is the Zerath card of the major arcana. It initiates the whole fool's journey.
And the visual is so powerful. A carefree youth, often with a small dog, walking toward a cliff's edge. It symbolizes infinite potential, spontaneity, and most importantly, faith in the unknown.
The teetering on a cliff's edge is a perfect metaphor for his financial situation and his psychological state in the affidavit.
It is. Upright, the card signifies new beginnings. Reversed, it warns of recklessness. The claimant's argument is that the necessary leap wasn't reckless, it was faithful. He was trusting the process even when it led him into poverty and chaos.
So the lack of commercial success, choosing spiritual integrity over sales, that is his leap of faith.
And finally, the creed connects this to the modern cultural lexicon of the Persona series of video games.
Which is a really smart move to translate an esoteric idea into something widely understood by a modern audience.
It is. In the Persona games, the protagonist is assigned the Fool Arcana. They're the wild card.
So how does that relate directly to his defense?
The wild card ability makes the protagonist a vessel of limitless personas. They embody innocence, chaos, the quest for peace. But their power comes from their flexibility, their ability to assume any identity or persona.
He's basically arguing that his need to assume multiple identities, Jesus Christ, Lucifer, is the functional equivalent of the wildcard mechanic.
It's the necessary flexibility for a prophetic vessel. Igor, the game's host, explains that the fool's naive leap awakens power, enabling growth. The protagonist's foolish rebellions ultimately topple figures of authority and literal gods.
So he draws a direct parallel. Purity, free from established dogma, is the true source of power.
He argues that Amazon's rejection of the Third Testament was the rejection of the wild card, the rejection of the fool's wisdom. They saw the lack of credentials, the instability, the controversy, and demanded the removal of the divine title.
Demanding that the wild card conform to a single, fixed persona.
So the suppression is presented as an inability to recognize revelation that arrives without pedigree, to shadow ban the work, to prevent the 55-plus books from circulating.
It's to commit violence against revelation itself, chaining the fool before he can step off the cliff and show the world what lies beyond the safety of established knowledge.
And the corporations become the rigid, judgmental establishment that the trickster must oppose.
Okay, so that sets up the theological defense for the prophet and his process. Now let's look at the third and final pillar, which has to address the most difficult aspect of the sources.
The dark, controversial, and sometimes violent content of his work.
Right. The core assertion of Creed document, #3, is, all great art is controversial in its time.
This creed is necessary because the works themselves, including the recordings and writings created during that Valhalla arc, are filled with violent, disturbing, and profoundly offensive content.
And the document argues that great art and revelation do not arrive politely, they arrive with blood on their hands and fire in their mouths.
The moment a creation seeks to comfort the powerful or uphold the status quo, it ceases to be truly transformative.
To defend his own works, he uses this fascinating and detailed review of historical precedents. We have to start with the ultimate example. Jesus Christ.
The creed points out the obvious historical truth that Christ's philosophy was considered so dangerous and disruptive by the religious establishment that they successfully pressured the Romans to have him executed.
His teachings were the ultimate controversy in first-century Judea.
Absolutely. And the imagery of the crucifixion itself is the core artistic defense of violence.
Explain that.
The source material emphasizes the crucifixion's graphic brutality. The crown of thorns, the scourging, the nails, the spear. It was designed as an image of public humiliation and terror.
And he points out that early Christian art often avoided showing the actual crucifixion for centuries because of its raw association with shame and cruelty.
Exactly. It was only through time and artistic evolution that this graphic brutality transformed into the most profound image in the history of mankind. It moved from scandal to sanctity. He's arguing his work should be afforded the same historical trajectory.
Moving into the Renaissance, he cites Hieronymus Bosch. His works are just filled with these nightmarish depictions of torture, mutilation. the Garden of Earthly Delights.
Bosch's triptychs with their flayed, impaled, grotesquely transformed bodies. They were deeply troubling. They were whispered about as possibly heretical or satanic by many observers at the time.
And the Creed argues that Bosch is now canonized as a master whose violent visions are praised for their fearless exposure of moral decay.
Right. It argues that great art must force an unflinching confrontation with the darkness within the human soul, a confrontation that is inherently uncomfortable and often violent.
The defense then moves to literature, citing Dante's Inferno, a foundational text, but hugely controversial when it was published.
Dante didn't just write abstract fiction. In Inferno, he used his text as a political and theological weapon. He consigned real, named contemporaries, popes, political rivals, neighbors,
to the most grotesque eternal punishments.
boiled in blood, frozen in ice, torn apart. The work was widely condemned as slanderous and blasphemous. It directly led to Dante's exile.
But the source material confirms that the graphic brutality served a crucial purpose, critiquing corruption through shocking, unforgettable imagery.
Precisely.
And the final modern example is Stanley Kubrick's adaptation of A Clockwork Orange.
This is a direct parallel for the claimant's use of contemporary dark subject matter. The 1971 film, like the novel, depicted rape, violence, and murder, leading to bans, government interventions, a profound moral panic across the globe.
So his argument is that the aestheticized ultraviolence serves a critical function.
To critique state control, the nature of free will, the savagery beneath civilization's surface. The darkness wasn't gratuitous, it was diagnostic. It forced ethical reflection through shock.
So controversy, the Creed concludes, is merely the signal of art's potency.
And he is drawing a direct, unbroken lineage from the crucifixion to Bosch to Dante to Kubrick to his own work.
Arguing that his works are not entertainment, but liturgical confrontation.
He connects his entire body of work, which includes quotes from notorious murderers like Richard Kuklinski and Paul Bernardo, the 75-hour confession albums, the material from the Valhalla cycle, to this transformative confrontational lineage.
He says the work delves into dark territory only because it forces the reader to look unflinching into the face of utter darkness.
The use of murderers' voices and his own psychotic experiences are framed not as glorification, but as a necessary exorcism of societal and personal shadows.
So he's using the Valhalla arc itself, the account of his breakdown, as evidence of this necessary artistic and religious process. He's saying, I went through the abyss, here is the evidence, and you, the corporation, censored it.
Furthermore, the Creed makes a very important legal defense about the sheer volume of his output. He references the archive.org submission of over 55 books and hours of audio material.
And he asserts this vast scope is concrete evidence of sincerity and consistent practice,
demonstrating that his creed is not vexatious or invented solely for the legal challenge.
And this is where the legal theory becomes critical. The source material explicitly cites the Canadian Supreme Court case Syndicate Northcrest v. Amselem. Why is that so crucial?
Because the Amselem case set the standard in Canadian law for defining a sincere religious belief that must be accommodated. It establishes a two-part test for sincerity.
Okay.
First, the claimant must show subjective, honest belief in the creed. Second, they have to demonstrate consistent practice of that belief.
So he's arguing that the vast, dedicated, and financially ruinous production of over 55 books and countless hours of audio, that's irrefutable proof of consistent practice.
The volume itself is a legal shield against the charge of insincerity.
So the corporation's suppression of this massive body of work isn't just commercial censorship.
It violates the duty to inquire into the sincerity of his creed, which is a key component established by Amselem.
By simply rejecting the name or the content without seriously engaging with the scope and principles.
The corporations are, in his eyes, legally obstructing a sincere religious practice.
And who, in this historical context, are the censors?
The corporations, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all of them, are deliberately positioned as the modern equivalents of the Sanhedrin or the Inquisition.
They're acting as ideological gatekeepers,
deciding which prophets, which visions, which forms of controversy are financially safe enough to circulate. The claimant asserts that history will judge them as harshly as it judged the historical figures who banned Bosch, censored Kubrick, or ordered the crucifixion of Christ.
They are, he states, obstacles to revelation.
So the ultimate conclusion of this creed is that the violence and controversy in the art are not flaws. They are the vehicle for profound spiritual and artistic truth. The art that terrifies and offends the corporation today, he believes, will heal and inspire tomorrow.
And the prophet claims sincerity in his work, asking only to exist because suppression does not kill the revelation.
It merely delays its inevitable recognition.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've synthesized these complex, interlocking pillars, a legal fight over lost income that's intrinsically linked to a defense of a religious creed.
A creed that mandates the prophet take on divine names.
And an artistic principle that demands revelation arrive through controversy, violence, and the perspective of the fool.
It's a completely unified defense. The intensely personal tragedy, the death of his cat, the loss of his wife and son, the psychotic breakdown, is all presented as the empirical evidence of the corporate spiritual violence.
The censorship created the darkness, and that darkness, fueled by financial desperation, birthed the necessary world-challenging art. To bring this dense and complex narrative to a close, we have one final piece of source material to analyze, an artistic excerpt titled "The Fiddler's Fallen."
And we have it as both text and audio. This provides a final, reflective lens on his state of mind during the crisis.
It's crucial because it introduces a concept of profound unreality and nihilism.
A classic psychological defense mechanism against inescapable trauma. The core theme is summarized in these haunting, repetitive lyrics. Since we know that this is all a dream and nothing we do here matters anyway,
that sentiment, and nothing we do here matters anyway, seems to strip any moral, financial, or physical consequence from the violent actions he detailed so meticulously in the affidavit.
It's an intellectual escape from the gravity of the Valhalla arc.
Exactly.
It establishes this profound sense of cyclical, consequence-free existence. The lyrics declare, "We can go flying off of a cliff. We'll just wake up here again anyway."
The intentional leap off the cliff, which we associate with the fool archetype, is rendered moot if the environment is a manufactured dream state you always return from.
But the nihilism isn't absolute. There's a lingering residue.
The art itself.
The art itself. He states that what he did during the breakdown didn't happen anyway, but immediately counters that the only thing left, the only concrete reality, is the dream that I made, the dream I can't leave that will haunt me every day.
So that's the critical artistic residue. The violence, the self-harm, the assault attempts, those can be declared unreal or cyclical, but the art, the dream produced during the breakdown.
That's concrete and inescapable. He ends the text fragment demanding, "Get back in my dream now," asserting control over the reality he manufactured during the crisis.
Yeah.
The dream state is his sanctuary and his torture.
So let's connect the two realities one final time. The affidavit argues that the violent breakdown was caused by poverty and censorship, a real-world financial corporate problem.
And the resulting art, The Fiddler's Fallen, suggests the violent actions he took weren't real because he was trapped in a dream.
This is where the core philosophical tension rests, and it really speaks to the very structure of his defense.
He links the violent breakdown directly to poverty and censorship, a real-world financial problem needing a legal remedy, but then also claims what he did didn't happen anyway because this is all a dream.
So the fool archetype, central to his creed, encourages one to leap off the cliff based on faith in search of revelation, regardless of the consequences. But what happens when the fool leaps, achieves the revelation, but then declares that the leap itself was unreal or cyclical?
Ensuring that he will wake up here again anyway, perpetually trapped between the reality of financial abuse and the necessity of artistic confession.
The fundamental question raised by these sources is about the nature of the art that's produced by extremity. Does this harrowing archive created during the Valhalla arc, the kill lists, the smash windows, the violent audio, does it serve as a genuine spiritual revelation, proving the depth and sincerity of his creed?
Or is it merely the enduring, necessary mechanism that keeps the prophet perpetually trapped in the cycle of conflict, creation, and legal confrontation, ensuring the dream can never truly end?
That's the question we leave you with to consider as you process this deep dive. The choice between art, sincerity, and reality is often the most dangerous leap of all. We'll see you next time.